Welcome to the WebRTC BackRooms, a podcast deep scrolling into XR, AI, and the future of hanging out in the spatial internet.
The podcast slips behind the polished interfaces of contemporary tech and AI to uncover the disquieting depths beneath.
Wandering through online spaces and digital cultures, we turn WebRTC protocols into peer-to-peer spaces of gathering, an alternative beyond mainstream platforms.
Here, we meet investigative artists, researchers, writers, and architects to explore the uncanny ways we inhabit an increasingly tangled world.
We are Me and Other Me, Cenk Güzeliş and Anna Pompermayer. And today, we welcome you to the backroom of hidden labor behind machine vision with Nicolas Gourault.
In 2018, as German car makers raced to develop self-driving cars, they amassed immense troves of sensor-based footage. The same year, Venezuela's economic crisis pushed thousands into precarious digital labor. Many turned to online microtask platforms, where they found themselves labeling those very images, frame by frame, to train the vision systems of autonomous vehicles. One such system, a pilot self-driving taxi operated by Uber, was powered by invisible hands across the globe, from Venezuela to Kenya to the Philippines, when it ran over a person because it could not make sense of the world around through its eyes. It's a hidden global assembly line. Everyday street scenes captured in one part of the world and painstakingly processed by low-paid workers in another. Nicolas Gourault, a Paris-based visual artist and filmmaker, has made it his mission to expose this concealed layer of labor embedded within machine vision. His approach is both forensic and poetic, tracking how power operates through automated systems and the images they produce.
In Their Eyes, his latest film, and the continuation of the research initiated in Unknown Label, Gourault turns his lens toward the hidden people who help shape how machines see the world. These films combine interviews, scraped datasets, and global image pipelines into multi-channel digital collages, annotated driving footage, simulated machine vision, and virtualized world maps as seen by autonomous vehicles. Yet his works don't simply reveal an unseen workforce. They also interrogate the political economy of machine vision, a new colonial pipeline where the tedious labor of intelligence is outsourced to the global south, while tech companies uphold the illusion of autonomous AI. Behind every dataset lies a network of invisible labor. Behind every smart decision, a set of economic asymmetries. So, who really authors the vision of an AI? What does it mean when self-driving cars quietly depict and categorize the world around us without our consent or even awareness? And how might we reclaim some agency over these operational images, which are quietly redrawing the maps of our cityscapes?
Let's start with your films. Unknown Label and Their Eyes take us into the hidden world of people who train artificial intelligence vision. So the annotators who label images so that machine can learn what they are seeing in a way. And it's part of artificial intelligence that most people never think about. So we are wondering, how did you first step into this world? What drew you into the lives and the labor of annotation workers in the global south? And how did the whole process of the research somehow start for you?
So it started, I was working already around the idea of I would say the mass culture. I did some previous project about the culture of a football supporter. The idea of the crowd, and I was also interested in the kind of the process of building images of building the actual the apparatus of vision, I would say. And so I started to think about the kind of how these devices that are used today to record the world for machines are trained. And I don't know, I think it was out of curiosity. And then I also listened to a talk by Matteo Pasquinelli, which was very prevalent thinker around this idea. And that's how I discovered that there was a connection between how the computer vision systems are trained and invisible workers or mass of workers which are rendered invisible. And so there was kind of a connection for me between this idea of like the invisible crowd, like the crowd of workers, and the apparatus of vision, which is something that I don't know, I keep thinking about. And yeah, it started like that. So I was researching about this topic. I found out about the research of another academic called Florian Schmidt, who's like a design researcher, I guess. And he did a kind of a piece, an article explaining how in 2018, around that time, there was a big peak in demand for human labor to train a AI system, and especially to train self-driving cars for German car manufacturers, so like BMW, Audi, this kind of thing. And he described like how this was related to a phenomenon happening in Venezuela at the same time, where there was like a big social and economical crisis, which like threw a lot of people into like precarity and poverty. And so because they were kind of, they had the knowledge and the skills, and they had the gear as well, they had laptops and internet connection and so on, they could start to work for training self-driving cars. And so they happened to become the workers of the German companies. And so this was kind of the starting point of the project for me, like to understand that at some point there was a connection between a technological need, like to train self-driving cars to read the world and to drive, like a socio-economical situation with the crisis happening in Venezuela, and like how these two would kind of connect in a way that was also very specific, because it kind of reminded me of like let's say neo-colonial or like asymmetric power relationship between the global north and the global south. And so all this kind of like I don't know, was I pulled a thread, I put another thread, and I just thought that it could connect, and it was really kind of like connecting every interest I had at the beginning. And so it was interesting for me because I thought there I had the possibility to explore a very complex phenomenon through a very materialist approach, like looking at how the workers, they do their work, they train, they annotate the images and stuff like that. So it was kind of the starting point for me to the project. I wanted to focus more on the human side of it, like so. And when I discovered that there was this labor force, that was like something I could relate to, and I knew also I could get in touch with people, so I knew I could, have a grasp of this subject, because I think also it's a way to get into a very complex subject while keeping a human and almost intimate relationship from the beginning. Like I trying to understand this whole system, which is very hard to visualize because it's scattered all over the globe, and it uses like a network, a network of like tools to kind of spread out the system through a big huge space. And there was for me on a very I would say cinematic level, there was a need or like a desire to understand and to render visible this phenomenon, which was like invisible by its sheer scale. And so I started to be interested in that as well. And also of course, because it's kind of like there is a circulation of images we are accustomed to. Let's say with social media now, we are connected through everywhere in the world, and so there are a lot of circulation of images all happening all the time, like an insane amount of images. But there is also like a lot of images that are circulated, let's say, under the radar, in a way, that are not recognized, and because they are working images, they are images that are used for work, and also because they are images that are, I would say, used for machines. So I was interested also in this idea. And I know we are gonna maybe talk later about FROP, but I was interested in this idea of the operational images.
Exactly.
The images that become invisible because they are just part of a computer system or like a process. And so for me, it was interesting because the images that the workers annotating, so you have to imagine it's just like images of like as if it's like Street View, Google Street View, or like it's images of the street, and like you just like outline objects in the images. These images, they are a bit in between the operational images because they are meant to train an AI. And on the other hand, they are just images that are circulated among people, among, fellow humans.
Right.
So it's not just images for computer, it's also images that are seen by human. And I think that's something I was also very struck at the beginning of my research, like thinking that in this so-called automated flow of images, where we are thinking that, okay, these images are seen by automated system, so there is never a human who actually see these images. Then I realized that it was not the case at all, and that at the beginning of the process and also later, because they are checking the images regularly, there are humans actually looking at the images. And so it was kind of in terms of images as well, it was an hybrid, I would say, between technological images meant for computers and let's say the more classical images that we are used to, which are like symbolic and used to exchange between human, and so we can talk about these images and stuff like that. And it's so to wrap it up, like I would say, it's like it was a way through the images to have a sense of this global system, which involved humans from different areas of the world, which involved technical system, and which involves also other part of the world, so the global north, where it's going to be used in the end. So the images were like the linking device, I would say, that could allow to talk about the whole system.
Yeah.
And for me, that was also very useful in a way for the film.
Yeah, and it's your style as well as, like, as you mentioned, that's very parochian, the way how you use images side by side in your films that kind of creates new correlations that one would not necessarily immediately grasp or do that relation, for granted. But then exactly that's what you do with your way of montaging your films, that you put unrelated images side by side that are actually in a global scale very much affecting each other and linking to one another. I wanted to ask you about the kind of like a bit of insights, or like, can you share with us like the conversations with one of those annotators, the process of labeling? What do they think? Like, I know you talk about it in your films, we see it, but maybe it's nice to go through it once again.
Yeah, I mean, what I can tell is that let's say the process of interviewing, which was a bit. I tried to find a way. Basically, the question I had was how to create a connection with the workers that I was interviewing. So how could I get a bit closer to them, and at the same time, like acknowledging the distance that there is because of the. I'm also part of like let's say the other side of the images, because coming from like the city in the global north, I'm like also part of this whole system, which has the strong asymmetry of power. So I wanted to create a connection at the same time, kind of keep the distance, which was a bit weird. So I had to find the right protocol also for the interviews. And a way I tried to do that was, first of all, I worked with people who helped me from the area. So I worked with journalists and researchers who are based in Venezuela and in Kenya. And the idea when we would do an interview was to be always the three of us. So like me, the research assistant, who was also translating in case of the Venezuela, because I don't speak Spanish, and the person was interviewed. And so it was also, a way to create a bit more proximity and a bit more connection. And I was trying, so in terms of content, I was trying to see the process. So usually what I would ask is like, can you share like what you are working on at the moment? And so some people would, do screen share. And so we could also talk while they were working, or like talk about the images they were annotating. And I think that was a way to get, for me, it was important because it was a way to get more details. And I think these kind of details, they are for me one of the most interesting part, because it's details that you don't think that they are very valuable. Mm-hmm. So if you retell a story afterwards, these kind of details, you forget about them. But when you show the screen, there are many things that you deem not important, but they are here. Mm-hmm. And so you can focus on these kind of details. And when you start to focus on details, it becomes more important. And that's, for instance, also why in the film I'm like highlighting the categories they are working with, the workers. So they have like kind of PDFs with the categories that they can use. And there is one of the categories which describes like a human and like a covered human, it's called. And it's basically people who are lying on the street under sheets of like fabric. And it's basically like something that is quite, when I was asking the people who are the workers about that, they didn't really mention this category, because it's like something that they, I don't know, they learned it at the beginning and then they kind of forgot. Mm. But when we went through the PDF with them, like in the screen recording, then I could, say, okay, but what's that? And then like pause the kind of the flow of the interview, and then we could focus on this detail. And so it would reveal aspects that would be otherwise kind of invisible, because it's mundane. It's the banality of the work, Yeah. So I cannot really say the details of compensation, but the idea was the protocol I was trying to set up was that it was always about the work, how you deal with the interface, how you deal with the tools that you have to work. And also, I must add, it was important to me because that was the link for me, because the work that they do, like annotating these kind of images, it really resembled my work in a way as an artist / graphic designer. Sometimes I use the same kind of tool, so I do rotoscopy, I do this kind of thing. And so it was a way also for me to connect with people through the process in a way, which I found was more legitimate than other kind of connection, given the distance we had.
I just have two things that comes to my mind very spontaneously that we didn't discuss before. The first is, if you ever had the impression that, the work that these people are doing is actually a work of somehow great responsibility, because you are teaching a machine that then will operate in real world, although you maybe don't recognize its importance in that moment, but it's a very important type of work. And if I would have to execute that work myself about a place that I don't know, I am 100% sure that I would not know how to put that world into category, because I haven't seen it myself and I haven't experienced it myself. I'm talking just about if I would have to label a city in France instead of Austria, where I am right now, there are different rules, behaviors of people, culture. I'm not talking about the other side of the world. I'm talking about another country. So did you ever had the impression that it's a work that in a way it cannot be globalized and it cannot be outsourced in the way that it is? And then the other question is, what do you think about or how do you see these categories? Because categorizing the world into strict type of containers is something that absolutely avoids the slight differences that exist and all the errors and human factors and natural factors that exist in our reality. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, that was a big question I had during it's part of the project as well. It's part of the film, but there is this question of the subjective bias. There was a lot of discussion at some point, when talking about the human labor for training AI. There was this discussion of when you rate something, so it was more for content moderation or content classification, I would say, but how much the kind of the subjectivity or the culture of the person who is judging, who's categorizing, interferes or plays a role in the work, in the outcome. And that was something that was, of course, very, very strong. But what I discovered also during the research is how much this is framed in a way that the subjectivity of the workers is erased, basically, or put at a distance the mostly possible. And by that I mean that, for instance, like when I talk about the PDF with the categories, you have a lot of, I would say, guidelines and also sort of classes and reviews that come into play, so that the workers, they are taught how to label, what kind of category to use, and stuff like that. So it's also they are not completely left alone, and they cannot make their own categories. They have to use what's in the system. And then the question is like, okay, how did the designer think about these categories at the beginning? And so that's also like a big topic. But I was asking myself this question all the time, and that's why also in the film, and in the video, there is the kind of the contre-champ, like the counterpart of the workers, where you kind of see their surroundings. And then it asks the question of the categories. How do these categories how do they generalize? Can they be generalized? And do they fit, or do they match a place that is not in a major city of the global north? Because the kind of the images they were working on, they were mostly in the US. The kind of self-driving cars that were trained, they were used in the US mainly, and also in mainland China. But they were one of the projects in the film that I kept was in Las Vegas. So the images came from Las Vegas, which is also a very specific, place in the world. And so, I kind of kept this thinking about this question and try to address it in the film. But I could not address it by the questions themselves. I tried to address it with the montage. So trying to do this kind of contre-champ at the end, where the camera turns around.
But this, what you just answered, ties very well with the matter or the notion of the authorship as well, that is kind of distributed between unknown, workforce, as well as the machine gaze and corporate companies. So, it does maybe look effortless when a car identifying a stop sign, but you reveal that there are many human hands and decision behind that moment of recognition or vision. So in that distributed scenario of the agency or authorship, who should be then held responsible for the actions of the self-driving car? Because I'm asking this question to tie it to that event that you also highlight in your movie, the accident, right? Like the one conflict begins with the accident where the autonomous car strikes a pedestrian. Can you walk us through that moment, how the situation unfolds and what it reveals about authorship?
Yeah, and this is connected to a previous film I made, which is called VO, and which is also investigating the development of self-driving vehicles, self-driving cars. And the starting point of the film is a deadly accident between a car and a pedestrian in 2018, and it's the first deadly accident between a self-driving car and a pedestrian, which occurred in the US, and it was a vehicle that was operated by Uber at the time. And so, it's this system, the robotaxi, the self-driving cars, they are like robotics in general. They are very complex. There are many parts, many training aspects, many people involved. And so it really asks a question of accountability and liability in a way, especially when it comes to vehicles that can basically run over people. So it's it can become a deadly weapon in a way. And so this was kind of also a very intertwined question, which I tried to kind of understand even further in unknown label. So I tried to go at the root of the training. How do you decide who's a pedestrian and who's just a pile of shit in the street, and that's not even a human, this kind of decision. And so that's what you see in unknown label with the categories.
Right.
But then in VO, it was also big, very complex question, because the car was driving on its own when it hits the pedestrian. but there was like a vehicle operator in the car. So someone whose job was to monitor the car and take the driving wheel if there was a mistake. But the more I kind of dig into the subject, the more I understand like there were some flaws, like major flaws in the way this person, the VOs, they were kind of working, and they were doing shifts that were too long for them to really keep their attention. Basically, they were phasing out because that's the way human brains work. You know, after a certain time, you just like phase out. And on top of that, so there was like the issue of the person at the driving wheel. There was the issue of the company, Uber, and the working condition at the company. But on top of that, there was also and that's a layer I didn't really investigate in the film, but that was something I found out in the research. There was the level of the urbanistic decision. Mm-hmm. So, like to say very simply, like the car, when it hits the pedestrian at the time, it was at a crossing where there used to be like so the pedestrian was basically, she was crossing the road in the middle of the road. And so she was with the bike as well. And so people were saying, what was she doing here? Like she's crossing in the middle of nowhere and during the night. So it's like her fault basically. But it happened like in the report, they revealed that there used to be a crossing walk at the same place. So they just removed it. So in a way, there was also like the urban planning. Yeah. What kind of had its part of responsibility in the accident. Yeah. So it's a very layered situation. But what's interesting, or like what's kind of saddening, is that at the end, when it came to prosecution, like the only person that was prosecuted and that had, that had to suffer the consequences of the tragedy was the person, was the VO, was the person behind the driving wheel. And she was sentenced. Yeah, she was sentenced in the end because she was basically, I would say like some sort of cannon fodder. Yeah. Like she was just put in the seat also to be held responsible in case of an accident. Right. So it's not so much that she was really the cause of the accident, but just legally, she was just considered as such. Mm-hmm. And in the end, like 3 years later, the only prosecution that was held was against her, and she basically was convinced. So it's a very complicated network, but in the end, it's tied in such a way that, for that specific case, it was tied in such a way that all the responsibility was legally falling on one person who was maybe the least, I would say, knowledgeable about the whole situation, right. Which is a bit ironical and cynical.
Yeah. I think also perhaps we can also talk about that there is such invisibility behind this work. That's why the person who was the test driver was held accountable as the responsible person for the accident, because I don't know, legally or also in the society, that there's little knowledge about the kind of process happening behind this. So there is a total invisibility, right? That the fact that this labor is almost never seen, as well as like, the label maker, as well as the data sets, how they operate in the background. And maybe you can tell us, why do you think it is kept so hidden? Like why is it so out of sight? Or what shifts when we actually start to see and acknowledge the kind of social, workforce behind these data sets?
Yeah. I think I was thinking about this question, and I think there is like something that has to do with there was a very mundane view that is like it's infrastructure in a way. So infrastructure is like something that has to be hidden so that it works flawlessly, and people don't want to give a shit about like how something is built as long as it works, because they just want to use it and that it works in a flawless way. Mm. So I think there is like a very mundane like thinking of like, okay, we don't want to bother with the process behind what we use. So that's one kind of like banal aspect of it, I think. But I was also thinking that for me, and it appeared more and more clearly when I was doing my research, that at least for the micro work that is basically done through online websites or online platforms, that's something interesting. Like the platforms, they are double-sided. There is one side of the platform, which is kind of the open public name of the website. and which is like, calling clients and like doing the advertising and stuff like that. And there is another side of the platform, which is hidden and which is related to the workers. So that's the platform where the workers connect to when they want to work. So that's the same company, but the website has two different names. And so I was thinking about that, and I thought it became more clearly to me that it was a way to kind of separate the workers from the rest of the process, and so that the workers don't know who they work for. They cannot complain to the customers because they don't know who the final customer is, the final client is. So it's also a way. It's not just mundane situation. It's also a way to obscure the way the system works, so that it's preventing any form of resistance.
Yeah.
And so I think it's deliberate on the part of the company to kind of scatter the workers, and that's why also in the film I was like interested to show the informal ways through which the workers could try to communicate between each other. And they could share the information. They could share information about the jobs they were doing, about the payments, and about ways to bypass the payments. And so for me, that was an important part of the project, to show that it's designed in such a way to weaken the power of the worker in a way, but still the workers find ways to bypass the system or to play with the system, even though it's like precarious, it doesn't last long, but still it does exist. And I think also for the last part of the question, like what does change when we know about the work and the workers? I hope it's like also a big question, but I at least I hope we have a basic idea of what comes into things that seem or that might seem very soon like common, and it's just like a car driving itself. Now it's becoming more and more common, but we have a basic idea of all the layers and all the decisions that are involved in this process. So we know that it's not like we cannot just take this for granted, that there are a human intervention at some point. And I think it's important now because there is a lot of discourse about automation that is like objective, that works better because there is no human involved in the process. But I don't think it's true, and it's not going to be true for a while. So I think it's important for that. And then I don't know if my project is too small for that, but I hope it's also a way to publicize this kind of work, and maybe then to have the company, address the working conditions. And for instance, there was a big case where the MIT Tech Review, I think, published a big article on the subject, and then because of that, Google, who was using the service of this company, had to question and in the end change its supplier. So it changed basically to another company, which is supposedly more respectful of the workers' rights. Then the question is is it really true? Is it the end of the story? And I talked with one of the workers who was saying that although the public reason for the change in supplier was the workers' condition, it was just a way for Google to basically work with a supplier that was cheaper in the end. So for them, it was a way to escape the polemic, but also to find a way to just gain more money in the end. So that's a tricky situation, but I still think that it can hopefully help to, make a little bit the power balance a little bit more equal, I hope, or a bit less unequal at least.
Yeah.
There is maybe one last question that we are thinking about. So if we zoom out, let's say from the pure image and think about artificial intelligence also in terms of the materials that are fundamental for its functioning, talking about servers, sensors, batteries, everything relies on minerals that are extracted under unequal conditions. So there is somehow a parallel between the old colonial trade routes and today's digital infrastructures, both from in terms of the materials and in terms of the data extracted and how they are controlled. And I know you had thoughts about this. So we are wondering if you can give us some hints about how do you see this, what maps, if one should create a map of what artificial intelligence is today, how would it look like?
I mean, it's like a super hard, super complicated like thing to imagine, and that's like my project was kind of a first step for me to, or first layer for me to understand. But I mean, there are like amazing works by Kate Crawford and Vladan Yodler, you know, who are working on that, and they've made an amazing like cartography, which is so incredibly complex of the whole system, and so you can have a little bit of understanding of all the layers involved, and that's an I don't know, like endless endeavor because it's so huge. But from what I could see, yeah, there is like a kind of like an overlapping of some of the like the neo-colonial like situation with the digital labor, I would say. So of course, like depending on the language first. So and the language is also like a remnant of the colonial presence. So there is something that's really striking for that, and like for instance in the Philippines and in Kenya, where like people are most people they talk and they speak English, and so they have access also to the kind of like the work in the US, for instance. And so there is this kind of like, or England, there is this connection. And in Kenya, it's very strong, the connection between Kenya and England. And that's something that was very striking during the project. And then I try to research more about the, let's say, the material aspect of the making of these systems. And so I recently finished a new work that's called 200,000 hours a day, and it's basically a piece where I'm trying to kind of trace the fabrication, the making of the NVIDIA GPU, because basically that's in the end that's a very core component of all the AI system that the companies use today. And already when you try to see just this very simple device, which is a GPU, that's in like most of the consumer PC and stuff like that, it's already so scattered. So you have like very like materials and components that are coming from a lot of different places. But at the same time, what's very interesting is that there are a lot of bottlenecks. So there are a lot of places where basically there is monopol on the material or the transformation. And the most famous one is like China with the rare earth minerals, which is like 70 to 90% of the world production. But there was another one that I discovered while doing my research about the pure quartz that is used to create silicon, which becomes the processor of the GPU. And this comes from a single mine in the US, which is called Spruce Pine in North Carolina. And so this, for instance, was kind of crazy because you think of it as something that's very globalized and that's kind of impossible to visualize and to understand. But it's just very localized at the same time. And it's so localized actually that there are bottlenecks. And if there is let's say like an issue, like big rainfall in North Carolina, for instance, it could alter and it could put a halt to the whole global supply chain in a way. So that's something that I'm still kind of trying to understand, like the whole kind of mapping. But yeah, I was surprised to see this connection between like something that's very global and at the same time that is super local, and it depends on the weather condition on the spot, things that are very, very locally.
Thank you so much, Nicolas, for sharing insights from your movies and for having time for us.
Yeah, thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much.